Today is Monday, June 10th, 2024. This is Spring Office Hours Season 3, Episode 22. What's new in Spring AI 1.0 Milestone 1? My name is Dan Vega, Spring Developer Advocate at Broadcom, joined by my good friend and colleague, DaShaun. DaShaun, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing wonderful. It is a great time to be a Spring developer, and I'm the buzz coming off of Spring IO it's still there. It's still palpable. Yes, amazing T-shirt, Chief Spring Officer T-shirts all around. That was a fun little exercise of that the attendees had to go and find somebody else that matched their badge in order to get their T-shirt, and it was totally worth doing. The T-shirts are amazing, and then the networking and finding somebody that has the matching badge, that was a fun exercise. I thought that was very innovative, and it's a great time to be a Spring developer.
All right, well, we have an exciting show today. We're going to talk about a new release in one of the hottest projects in the Spring ecosystem. We talked about it, I think, a little bit last week, a little bit when we talked about our wrap-up of Spring IO. But yeah, it's going to be fun talking about Spring AI. But as always, we are here on a live stream on YouTube. So if you're here joining us, please do us a favor. Let us know where you're joining us from. And you got to get those questions in. Part of our contract is to come here and kind of fill you in on everything that's happening in the Spring ecosystem, as well as answer your questions. Even if we don't know the answers, a lot of the times I don't know the answers, I know who to go ask for the answer to those questions. So get those questions in. Yeah, we have Google Chat.
We have ways. We have channels.
But if you're not here on the live stream and you want to catch this on the replay, you can do it on YouTube. Today will probably be a good time to catch the replay on YouTube because there'll be some visuals involved. But we also go ahead and turn this into a podcast. So tomorrow morning, this will be published wherever you get your podcast. So please go ahead and listen to us in the car, on your run. If you're ironing, and ironing takes a long time, that's a great time to listen to a podcast. So join us wherever you get your podcast. And if you could do us a favor and leave us a small little feedback on one of those podcast platforms, that would really help us get our podcast kind of moved up some of those charts.
We're always trying to get better too. Like we have to know, like, what's it going to take to get you to listen to our podcast?
If you got feedback for us, we're always open to that as well. So.
Love to see people joining and saying hello and letting us know where they're from. My mom and dad are always watching. Hi, Mom. Love you guys. And it's always fun for us and for our friends to see like where people are joining from. And I know that it's not always the best time for everybody around the globe. So when we see people that it's 10 o'clock at night or 2 a.m. in the morning joining us for the live stream, like, wow. Absolutely. That's just amazing. Wow. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Awesome. The Ottawa Jug. Nice. So what have you been up to? What's going on? What are you working on lately?
I'm still recovering from an extended trip. But I think that my body's like finally figured out, like last night was like the closest thing to a good night's sleep that I've had since being back home. And what am I working on? Still like hanging out with customers and working with customers, trying to make sure that they are getting all the information. This is the thing. And I've been saying it a lot lately. Maybe it's a top 5 question. Like, how are we supposed to keep up with all of the things that are happening inside of the Spring ecosystem, let alone the Java ecosystem? How are we supposed to do that? That's why we have this show. That's one of the reasons why we have this show, because we don't have all the answers, but what we are trying to do is give you like, hey, here's some things that you might want to pay attention to. The TLDR. I had that, when we were working together and we're all coming into the office, like, hey, have you seen this cool new thing? Somebody's got to do it. Wouldn't it be nice if you had a way to get the latest updates, to see what's coming down the pipe, and to know like what you should be looking forward to? That's one of the things that we're trying to do here, is we want to give you that summary, that Cliff Notes version of things, so that you can keep on moving forward. We don't want you to get stuck. And if you know me, you know that I want you to be on the latest and greatest. I want you to be getting the benefits of all the latest and greatest releases, all the patches, all the cool new features. We want you to be adopting that, taking it to production. If you milestone release, we still want to get your feedback on it. So part of our job is to tell you the things that you need to know so that you can adopt all of the cool new features and releases so that you can continue to move forward. And then in turn, we can, as an ecosystem, as a community, we can continue to move forward as well.
Cool. Comment from Donald. Hi, Dan and DaShaun. I hope you both had a wonderful weekend. I did. I got to hang out with the family, so that was fun. Also, Donald asked me a really interesting question via email. I have not forgot about you, Donald. I have sent this over to the Spring Security team to see if I can get an answer myself, because, again, I don't always have the answers. So when I get an answer, I will get back to you on that, Donald.
I like the next one.
Yeah.
Agile Guru says, by the way, upgrade from 3.2.6 to 3.3.0 was very smooth. Good documentation. Always happy to hear that. That's wonderful. We will make sure that your kind words get passed along to the right people. Hello,
got Denmark and Germany, more Germany.
Guten Tag.
Guys, do you know when Spring AI 1.0 will be released? Any estimations?
What? Where would we go find that information? Where would we go take a look for information like that?
Normally, we would look at the calendar.spring.io, but it hasn't been updated on the Spring AI project. I know this because I'm inside the Spring AI chat that's going on about that. So Mark is going to work on getting that updated.
But ballpark, what does it say right now?
I would say this summer is a good estimate.
Yeah.
I don't know anything else other than that, but I would say until there's dates put on the calendar and updated.
Right now, there's a date.
I know.
Right now, it says July 2nd, but
I'm saying
that's going to change. It's going to change.
That is not right because M2 was supposed to be released last week, didn't get released. So Mark is working on updating that calendar. I would expect there's a conference later this summer, maybe sometime around then, hopefully. But I don't know anything, so don't listen to me.
No guarantees, but I think that's a good estimate. July,
yeah,
August. I think that's safe. And I can say this, that you don't have to wait for the 1.0 release. Are you taking it to production? Do you have a use case that you're taking to production? If you do, then go. And if it's not working out the way you want, then let us know. Open up an issue so that we can fix the things that aren't working for you. But I know that we do have customers in this ecosystem that are taking Spring AI to production. Even before the milestone release, they were using it. So hopefully that helps.
All right. Hi from India. Hi from Turkey.
It's not early days in India. There's a significant time difference. So thank you so much for joining. You've already put the kids to bed.
Is there an open rewrite update for upgrading to Spring Boot's latest release?
That is a great question. And the cool thing about open rewrite is that one of its features, one of the framework's features is to ask for the latest version. So it goes and does all of that work for you so that, yes, you can. So the recipe that I've been sharing for the past year about upgrading to Spring Boot 3.2, now you can grab a new bundle of recipes that's upgrade Spring Boot 3_3, and it will upgrade you all the way up to 3.3. And they've done an amazing job. And I'm looking at Tim specifically. Thank you so much for all the hard work that you've done, because when that release went GA, the recipe was already done. They know, because it's spring, they know the abstraction, they know the patterns. They're looking at the early releases. They're looking at the milestones. So Tim has done a wonderful job of having those recipes ready when the release comes out. And I'm just happy to say that yes, the answer is yes, you can upgrade.
Hello from Argentina. I mentioned this in my tweet, but yes, there is a WWDC 24 going on at the same time as this. But
this makes me even happier that you're here with us right now.
Exactly.
Wow.
And as big as an Apple fanboy I am, I'm not an Apple developer. So we're all Spring and Java developers. Stay here. This is more fun.
I have a question for you, Dan. Before we get on to
hello from Spain. Hi from Spain. We miss you. We miss Spain.
Yeah. You just mentioned about being an Apple developer. And my question to you is, would it be cool if we could take a Spring Boot application and run it on our iPhone? Would that be cool to you? Would that excite you, or at maybe pique your interest a little bit if you could do that?
I'm just being honest here. I don't think so. No. I would run my Spring Boot application in the cloud somewhere and provide like a REST endpoint for access to data, and I would run like a native app or something on my phone. I don't know that I would compile a Spring Boot app and run it on. What's the benefit to doing that?
Because it's there. Because I can. Because I don't have the money to spend in the cloud, but I've got an iPhone device. Maybe I want to run my Spring Boot apps on that iPhone device. Maybe I would like to be in production on my iPhone instead of having to have a cloud somewhere. That's all I'm saying. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm just throwing it out there.
You probably need data. You need data somewhere. Where's that data going to live?
Data. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. That'd be tough.
All right. Would it be tough?
I can't think of a use case for it, I guess is what I'm saying.
So if you would like to see a use case for Spring Boot on an iPhone, since it is WWDC24, if you'd like to hear the use case, here's what I want you to do. I want you to smash that like button and that subscribe button, and I want you to tune in, because at some point on this show, we're going to talk about that.
All right. I like it. Korea joining us. That's awesome. Hello. Can you suggest most required things to be learned for a Java Spring Boot developer? I am going to jump over to a browser. Let me get there real quick. DaShaun, say something interesting while I'm finding this.
Spring.Academy. Spring.Academy. For anybody that's trying to learn and trying to, build a base, they've heard about Spring, they're interested in Spring, they've got a lot of cool things. I want you to start at Spring.Academy. For others, I want you to look. This is exactly, we've started it here. We have a resource exactly for you, and we even developed it here during the show.
Yep. You could see there is a link to the show, season 3, episode 8. So during an episode of Spring Office Hours, we went through and kind of built this out. Then we went and took it and put it into a repo. So there's a lot of good resources for learning Spring here, like official Spring stuff, documentation, books, podcasts, YouTube, blogs, events and conferences, some GitHub repos that you could take a look at, being able to upgrade Spring, and then some of our community favorites like Spring Builders, the LinkedIn group, the Facebook group that I manage, and others. So this is a really good list of resources. I think it's a good place to start.
Yeah. Rohan, I hope I'm saying your name right. There's different levels to this thing, right? The Spring ecosystem is massive. Being a Spring Boot developer is just one small piece of that pie. So what we have compiled here is a list of resources that once you get through there, you might find out that you're very interested in data streaming. You might find out that you are really passionate about AI. Or maybe you realize that batch runs the world and you want to focus on batch workloads. Whatever it is, again, it's a massive ecosystem. There's something for everybody. You will find it in this list. It's Spring.Academy. I'm going to say start there. But you're going to say that was good. Or maybe I'm deeper than that. Maybe I have experience with other languages, other frameworks. There's something for you in that list. And if you don't find what you're looking for there, call us. Let us know. And we'll add to it. We'll help you find what you're looking for. That's our job. That's what we're here for.
All right. I threw a link in the chat, so you can go ahead and see that there. I am currently using LangChain for J and Spring Boot in a small proof of concept. Quite impressed, especially for the tools abstractions functions in Spring AI. Yes.
I hear this a lot.
Tools and functions are kind of synonymous.
Yep. And there's a lot of people doing if you've been in this space and you've been experimenting and using different models, you've in our ecosystem, you've probably ran into LangChain4j, and you're hearing all of the amazing things going on with Spring AI. And there's a lot of comparisons there. Both projects are moving forward. But if you're a Spring developer, those abstractions and the conventions around Spring, they kind of might lean you in the Spring AI direction. At least that's the way that it has worked for me. Is I like the abstractions that I get in Spring AI because they feel comfortable. They feel,
familiar.
Familiar. That's the word I was looking for.
Yep.
So that's where I'm
Agreed. At. We'll talk more about that. I've seen something like Spring Boot for Android. I don't know what it does. I don't think I've ever used that.
Yep, there was a project a while ago. I don't think it's around anymore. But this idea that we can develop native images, we can build things, interesting things to run on our phones using Spring.
iOS will never support Java.
Dan, you're going to have to come back. There's so much more. There's so much more.
All right. Cool. So I think that is it as far as comments and questions. If you have some more, keep them coming. I think what we'll do now is go ahead. Oh, I almost hit the remove button. Go ahead and jump into one of our favorite places on the internet, calendar.spring.io.
Calendar.spring.io. So many people don't know about it, right? They all know that there's start.spring.io. I don't know who made that popular, but calendar.spring.io. If you've got questions about the new releases, again, in 2023, there was only 4 weeks the entire year that the Spring team didn't release something.
That's crazy.
Only 4 weeks out of the entire year. And this is where you go to see, hey, when is my favorite project going to have another release? This is where you go and you can see what's coming. You can look ahead. You don't have to wait, right? You don't have to wait for that blog post to be like, oh, wait, I didn't know that was coming. I'm now going to change the palms. You can plan ahead.
So for those that are listening to us on the podcast, what is happening in the week of June 10th that has really kind of caught your eye?
I'm a big fan of Micrometer. So that's scheduled. The releases are scheduled to come out at some point today. Tomorrow, it looks like Reactor, everything is coming. But this is, I don't need to look any further. I'm seeing Micrometer and I'm seeing Spring Data releases coming out at the end of the week. Like, there's tons. Like, that's enough for me. That's enough to keep me busy, update all the palms, do all the cool things. That's enough for me. But there's some other really interesting things. We see some Spring Framework releases. I heard earlier, Thomas is here. Thomas said, yeah, they are working because they're working on Greenfield. They have adopted Spring Boot 3.3 and the 6.2 milestone release already. They're using it. And why? Like, why would they do that? First of all, it's not going to production yet. They're working on it. And if they're using the new APIs, the new versions of things, when that does come out, they're ready to go. Right? When the milestone, the next milestone comes out, boom, they can take it. But the other piece of that is they are getting to try all the new cool things. They're not waiting. They're never going to be behind. They're staying at the front. They're moving forward. And if they run into something, they can get feedback. So they're being like an MVP. His org they're being the kind of customer that we all want to be, is that we can take all the new cool things and we can get feedback on it. We can help with the roadmap. We can help with the issues so that when it does go GA, it's been worked out.
I see, as you pointed out, Spring Framework 6.2.0 milestone 4. Again, any of these releases on the calendar, you can go ahead and click through and kind of see what's in there. I had a chance to watch Jürgen Haller's presentation from Spring I/O, the one you were sitting in on that you told me about. Just to see his excitement about some of the core changes being made in 6.2 around bean initialization and how the container is basically bootstrapped and all of these things like happen. It was interesting to see like all of these things and some considerations that went in. So if you have very small applications, maybe these aren't going to affect you, but if you have very large applications, like thousands or tens of thousands of beans being initialized, these changes are going to be really interesting to you.
When I was sitting in that session he said, "Oh, hundreds of beans like that. For a Spring Boot microservice architecture, probably not running into hundreds or thousands of beans being initialized."
Right.
And then when I'm sitting in the front row, I'm like, "Yeah, like I can't imagine what that would look like." And then at the end of the week last week, I said, in not one but two customers, where I was like, "Oh yeah, this is the type of customer that might have an application that has been running Spring since early 2000s, and it might have hundreds of beans being initialized, and that startup time might be impacting." So after watching Jurgen and seeing how passionate he was about we got a couple of new default settings, a couple of new tricks, but these initialization optimizations that we're getting in Spring Framework 6.2, they are going to have an impact. Probably not for any of my projects, but at the end of the week last week, I was like, "Oh, okay, now I get it." There are customers, and now it's easier for me to visualize. There are customers where this type of an optimization that we're getting in Spring Framework 6.2 is making somebody's day. It's going to affect their revenue stream. It's going to affect the developers in that organization because their lives are going to be better off. And all that they've got to do to get that, to take advantage of those new things, is do an upgrade. And then they're going to get it. It's an amazing place to be. The backlog works.
All right, I have a comment here. Can you suggest most required things for a developer in cloud computing? I cannot. That's a very large subject. But what I can tell you is DaShaun and I did an overview of all the things at a high level in Spring Cloud. So if you go to spring.io/projects/Spring Cloud, and you look down here under talks and videos, look at this: distributed applications with Spring Cloud on Spring Office Hours. So the Spring Cloud team was nice enough to add this video to this homepage. I think this is a really good place to start, to have a conversation about the different projects in the Spring Cloud ecosystem to kind of get you going. But as far as like, what do you need to know to become a cloud developer? Like that's a topic for another day.
You know what,
probably.
though? I think that Rohan's questions, I think are a good example of like, hey, maybe you're new to the stream. Maybe you haven't heard us chat about these things in the past, and you'd like to get caught up. You can see almost every episode that we've done, except for maybe one or two. You can see all of those episodes on YouTube, and you can listen to most of them through the podcast, and you can get caught up. And then once you've got through the 100, 200, and you've kind of understood where we're at, it's always a good time to kind of reestablish the baseline for us. So any question is fantastic. But for you, because I can tell that you're interested, I really want you to consider going back. And there's not that many episodes. It's less than 100, right? You can listen to all the podcasts. You can be completely caught up with all the latest and greatest tips and tricks if you just listen to the podcast. But we're also here to answer your questions.
All right. So that is calendar.spring.io. If you're ever curious about what's happening in the release calendar, what projects are getting released when, this is a really good view of that. You can come in and see the calendar view. You can look at a list view. Again, you can dive into something like 6.2.0 milestone 4 and see what was covered in here. You can see a few open, but a whole bunch closed. And it's really, again, before the release notes are kind of out on this stuff, this is the best place to look, right on the GitHub, to see what was closed. And then you can always like dig through here and go, oh, that's something that I've come across before. That was pretty interesting. I mean, you don't need to spend an exhaustive amount of time on here, but just kind of quickly glance through there and see if anything kind of piques your curiosity. So, so that is the release calendar. Again, today's topic was really kind of going to go into a new release. When we are at Spring 1 or Spring IO in Barcelona, a new version of Spring AI dropped, 1.0.0 milestone 1. This is exciting for a bunch of reasons. One, it's the first release of the 1.0 release of Spring AI. This has been a project that went from kind of idea to inception to an experimental project on the Spring side, then graduating the experimental project to be in the real kind of projects landscape, right? So out of experimental phase into the projects. and then went through a whole bunch of iterations, right? Kind of thought we got to like a stable point in 0.8.1. Turns out we kind of flipped that on its head in 1.0, but
lots of changes.
It's
but
been
that's
through a lot
expected.
of changes, and that's what these types of projects do, right? Hey, here's an idea. What does the community think of it? Okay, let's refactor based on some feedback that we got. And as DaShaun said, we had a bunch of feedback from the community of people using this in real world applications. So I know Mark and Christian and team have worked closely with different customers using this in real world applications, and a lot of changes kind of went based off of that. So it's exciting to see 1.0 out there. I'm not sure how long we've been from like first announcement to now, but it's probably been
November.
a year and a half. November last year. I'm saying like even experimental. So this project's probably been around like a year and a half.
Yeah, we saw the timeline.
There was a timeline. Yeah. I can't remember what that was.
And I like the way that Mark explained that timeline.
Yes.
Because he started it with the Spring CLI story.
Yeah.
And that's where his mind was like, I got an idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, very cool.
Yeah, and I remember sitting down with Mark when we were in New York. This was probably like 2 years ago, and it was around the Spring CLI, and he had a lot of vision around like, I really want this tool to like help me write code, yes. Right? And then ChatGPT hit the world, and I think everything changed from that. So.
Yes.
Cool. So a lot changed in 1.0. Some breaking changes, some additions, and I want to talk through this, and we'll even look at some code. So if you are listening to us in the car or on the treadmill, because you just enjoyed listening to us, well, first, thank you for that. But two, we will try to do our best to explain what we are going through, because I'm going to go through a blog post, and then we'll probably even look at some code for those here on the live stream. But all this we'll do is kind of explain this to you, and then maybe come back and watch the live stream later if you want to see some code. So we're happy to announce the 1.0.0 milestone release of Spring AI. The release has new features and improvements. So the first one I want to talk before I get into this first one was, I thought Spring AI was like really easy to use before this. I didn't really have any complaints because I couldn't see into the future. But now that I've seen some of these improvements, I'm like, oh, this is so much easier. It seems a little verbose, like what we had to do before, but I didn't see that at the time. It just seemed okay to me. And part of this is because of the new chat client Fluent API. And this gives us this really nice Fluent API for doing everything that we need. Creating a prompt, sending the user message off to the LLM, making that call, getting a string back. That was all kind of like a few lines of code before, where it was like 3 or 4 lines of code of creating a prompt template, replacing some things, and then actually using the chat client to get the result, get the output, get the content. There was like this chain that you had to do to just get like a string response back. Yeah. And now it's this Fluent API, and it's really easy to use. And for those of you on the live stream here, you can see the code here. It's a little bit different than it was before. So before, you can just ask for an instance of a chat client. Now you're using the chat client builder. So this whole API was rewritten. I heard some really crazy stories about how this took place. Mark and Christian were kind of going back and forth on how they would do this. And I can't remember who it was they got in a room with them, but they got in a room with one of the other Spring team engineers and basically hammered this out in a day, this Fluent API. That's but awesome. If you're wondering why, maybe that looks familiar to you, is because if you use something like the web client or the REST client, we've done a lot of talks on the REST client lately. The REST client has a builder, and you use that builder to create an instance of the, in this case, the chat client. So you use builder.build, and that returns an instance of the chat client. What's interesting there, and we'll get into this, but at the builder level, you could set a whole bunch of defaults. Like I want a default system message or a default user message if one isn't defined. You could set some default advisors, which are new in 1.0. You can set all of these defaults at the chat client level and then use those as you make all your different calls in your different methods. So have you had a chance to play with this yet? 1.0?
I mean, you didn't go right back to your hotel and start playing with it immediately when you were in Barcelona?
I didn't.
Just me?
No,
I wasn't the only one.
You.
I know I wasn't the only one who immediately had to go in and update some of their demos.
I did update all my demos last week. I did a talk for the San Francisco Java user group on Spring AI. And so last week, beginning of the week, Monday, Tuesday, I was updating all of my demos to this. And I was like, oh, this is so much easier. So yeah, just seeing the before and after picture is pretty cool. I figured I'd show something off here real quick. Again, for those on the pod, we are kind of showing off IntelliJ. I have a Spring into AI GitHub repository under github.com/Dan Vega. There's a Spring into AI. There's a whole bunch of different examples in here that you could take a look at if you want. But I wanted to show off, again, just creating that instance of that chat client. And then you can do some things, right? Like when you call chatclient.prompt, you pass in a message, you use the call method, and then content is basically giving you a string back. So if all you want is the response from the LLM, this is what we had to do before with like get result, get output, get content. So now you can just call content. Now there are other ways to get more different information back, right? So when you get an answer from an LLM, it usually has some metadata around it, like what are the choices, what are like the inputs and outputs. There's all this other metadata around it. So if you want that, you can, instead of calling content, you could say, hey, give me a chat response back. Inside of there is the actual answer that you care about, but there is some metadata around that as well.
Friend of the show, Lawrence, is here, and Lawrence says he just built his MVP using Spring AI, Gemini 1.5, and Vaadin, and the blog's going to come out this week. And now my question is, Lawrence, are you using the 1.0.0 milestone release? Because if not, what are we going to do about
Let's update it.
Fix
yeah.
Let's get
yeah.
And if so, yes, congratulations, and I'm so happy for you. Either way,
that'll be awesome.
It's going to be amazing.
Yep. Yeah, and then as I started updating some of these repos, one of the questions I had was, okay, well, what about in the instance in 0.8.1, I wanted to use a prompt template and replace like templates with an actual value from like an argument. Well, in this user method, we could pass in a message. This is the user message. But we can also, if you look at the kind of contract for this, it takes in a consumer of a user spec, and a consumer is a functional interface, which means I can pass in a Lambda here. And the Lambda, based on, if you look at the user spec, which implements a prompt spec, has some different things that we can pass into it. So things like what is the text and what are the parameters that we're trying to replace. So I find this so much easier than having to create a prompt template, pass in a map, replace those things, and then pass that into a prompt and send that into the chat client call, right? So, yeah, I was just rewriting this stuff last week in pure joy, having fun doing it.
Happy.
Yeah.
Like this is the kind of refactor that makes you smile.
Yes,
I
love
get
it.
that.
I also went through and did a stream example. So the chat client call method is blocking, but I have an example here of if you're using the chat client, you can call prompt, you can pass in your user message as you just did before, but instead of calling call, you call stream, and now this is going to produce a stream instead of just a blocking call. So again, we're just getting our content out of there, but ultimately what that is returning is a flux of strings. So the signature for that method is a flux of streams. This is I think this is really good because I didn't quite know like some of the use cases where I might use a stream versus just, hey, I just want to get a response back. And I think if you were to run this example and you ask it a simple question like, tell me a joke about dogs, right? It's very quick with that. It can generate that really fast. But what if you said like, hey, I'm visiting San Francisco next month. This was the example I used at the joke. Give me 10 to 15 places I absolutely have to visit. If you do that, you're going to kind of be waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And it's not because the LLM's slow. It's because it's generating 10 to 15 places. And it's not just a list of places. It tells you like in detail, like you have to visit the Golden Gate Bridge because it's historic and it was built back in, whatever year it was built. And so there's a lot of content that is getting sent back. So from that standpoint, if you use a streaming call, then you can kind of just output content as it's coming back from the LM. So the user is not sitting there like wondering what's happening.
Users matter. Is that what you're saying? Like there's
They
cases
do.
where that latency matters.
Absolutely, it does.
I get it.
So we got a question here. Are we using generative AI model in the chat client.builder or calling APIs to get the result for user problems? So in the example that I have on screen, if you were to look in this repo, basically you have to define a model that you're going to use. When I went to start.spring.io, I picked a web app. I picked OpenAI, so it ends up adding the appropriate starters here. So we get Spring Boot Starter Web, Spring AI, OpenAI, Spring Boot Starter. So it knows what model I'm using. And then in my application.properties, I am basically saying, hey, here's my OpenAI API key, which I'm using an environment variable. Don't hard code your secrets here. And then I'm saying, hey, the version of the model that I want to use is, in this case, GPT-4o, the latest and greatest from OpenAI. So once you set that up, that is creating the mechanism that is saying, hey, when we create a chat client, we are going to talk to OpenAI because chat client is an interface. So if we look at chat client, that's an interface. But what we are ultimately creating is I think so this is a default chat client, but it's going to use OpenAI because that's the one we've configured. Link to repo, please. Yeah, let me do that.
I'm going to put a link to the project in first.
Yes.
Because you should start with the docs, right? Understand. We didn't do really a job of kind of level setting for Mandeep. When I think of Spring AI, the metaphor in my head is Spring Data. I think that when you've been in Spring and you've used Spring Data, the idea that, hey, you can use Postgres in one project and you could use Redis in another project, and you're going to have some comfort level of switching between those two backends, those two data stores, or Oracle or MySQL or whatever that backing store is. Because you're using Spring Data, it makes it really easy to move. You have that flexibility. Spring AI does something similar for Gemini, Bedrock, OpenAI, all the old Llama stuff. You get that same layer of abstraction that gives you the comfort, gives you the hooks to use the different backing LLMs for whatever you're working on.
Yeah, and I will say, a question I've gotten a lot because I've been talking about this to a lot of different customers, even last week at the Jug. One of the questions that comes up is, okay, well, I see that you have support for a bunch of different LLMs. So if we go into the docs and we look at Spring AI API, we can see like from a chat client perspective, what are the different chat models that are supported? There's OpenAI, Llama, Azure, Amazon, Bedrock, Google, the list goes on and on. So one of the questions is like, what if I want to use two different LLMs in the same application? And is there ever going to be a need for that? And the answer is, of course, because we support different modals of interaction, right? Like there is a chat model where, hey, I'm going to send you some text and I want you to generate some new text back. But there's also I'm going to send you an audio file and I want you to generate me a transcription of that audio file. And not everybody supports all the different multi-modals, right? Some support chat, embeddings, image, audio. Some have a mixture of it. So in one application, I maybe use an OpenAI for their transcription service, but I may find that like Google Gemini does a better job of generating the text that I need for my specific application. So yes, you can use two different models in here. And again, that is one of the principles behind Spring AI, is that when you write this code here, when I come in here and I say, here's a chat client, go ahead and call system and give me a string back. It is not saying call OpenAI. It is not saying call Gemini. It is the same code no matter what LLM I'm talking to. And the magic in this is really everything that was done underneath the hood to make this possible, to make this simple API for us to use.
And just like anything else, right? You have options, and everybody's going to say, well, which one should we use? What's the best one? It depends. You have this beautiful abstraction that gives you the ability, before you go to production, to ask the same questions, to use the same prompts, to do some experiments with multiple LLMs, and decide which one is best for your use case. They are not all created equal. There are differences, and each model has its own strengths, its own weaknesses, its own trade-offs for what you're going to do with it in production. Take the time to explore and find out which one's going to work for you.
So I do want to give a shout out to Craig Walls as well. Craig is somebody I talk Spring AI with all the time. He has got a book coming out by Manning, Spring AI in Action. And I'm lucky enough to be a reviewer on this book. Exciting things. I'm really excited about the kind of direction of this. So if you want to kind of sign up for, I don't know if there's like early access yet, but that should be coming soon. So go ahead and take a look at that. But if you look in his repositories, he also has some Spring AI examples, some really good examples. Again, I am very much a documentation first. Let me find some GitHub repos with some examples of things that I want to do. I think with that combination, you can get pretty far with a lot of this stuff.
I also think that he has a catalog. Yes, he does. In his Spring AI examples repository, there is a project catalog YAML that you can pull into Spring CLI, and you can add his projects to your project just by doing Spring Boot add using the Spring CLI.
Nice.
So he has made it super, super easy for you to take his example projects for a spin. I highly recommend you do it. Not only are his examples great and helping the project move forward, his book, if you've ever read one of his books, I really appreciate his style of writing. It's soothing, it's informative, there's not a lot of fluff, and it gets the job done. I'm looking forward to his upcoming
Put on some jazz, pick up a copy of Spring AI in Action.
So his Spring in Action book,
yes,
there's an audible version of it.
Oh, nice.
And when I listen to it, you said jazz. It kind of is like jazz. It's just nice and smooth. It gets to the point and
all right,
gets those same good vibes. Yeah, take it for a spin. You won't be disappointed.
All right. So that is kind of the first feature. For me, that's the big feature. It's kind of a rewrite of how we were doing some things before. There's this nice chat client, fluent API, really easy to work with. Couldn't be easier to get started. So the next thing that we can take a look at is, a lot of when I'm presenting on Spring AI, DaShaun, one of the things that I kind of start with is that why Java and AI, right? Like we've heard all of this like Python space, like everything's in Python. And that's very true for building and training large language models. This is not what we are doing here. There is the one side of it, which is building and training these large models. There's another side of it of just consuming these large language models. So whether it's from Bash or straight Java, you can call REST API and be done with it. Like that's all you need. So what is the need for projects like LangChain4j, or Spring AI. What is the need for projects like this? And it's much more than facilitating a REST call to some endpoint, right? We have to start some problems when we start building these real world applications. One of those is I've called the LM. All I got back was a string. Now I need to do this dance of like, I need a type in my system. How do I do that? And so, sure, you could bring in some Jackson dependencies, figure out how to like deserialize that. Never a fun thing to do, especially if you have large models, right? So in 0.8.1, in previous versions, there was an interface called the output parser. There were 3 implementations of this: the bean output parser, the list output parser, and the map output parser. And so you could use these to get whatever you needed out of it. So I want a list of things, or I want a map with the list of things, or whatever, or I want it to look like this specific bean. So that bean could be a record, it could be a class with getters and setters on it. I want it to look like this. That was okay. That worked out okay. I had some examples of that. But now in 1.0, this has been simplified so much. So I'm looking at an example on screen of a record called actor films that contains a actor, which is a string, and then a list of string called movies. So now that I have this record, I'm calling the LLM and I say, what you get back, I want you to turn into this entity. So use the entity method. You're not like implementing some interface somewhere or using some type. You're just saying, and what I want back instead of content, remember content was give me the string response. Now I'm saying I want an entity back, and it is of type actor films. And what happens underneath the hood is it looks at that type, and then it can figure out how to ask the LLM for the appropriate response and then turn it into the appropriate response. So this process of the dance back and forth of how to get a specific type out of there has been significantly simplified in my view.
This is awesome. This is it. This is exactly it, right? Like I've had that same question. Like, what's the point of it? Well, what's the point of, again, back to Spring Data? Like, you could call the database, right? You can have a JDBC or ODBC client. You can call the database and get back what you need, but it's all of the other stuff that goes along with it, right? If you want to be at that low level, you can. It's not preventing you from doing that. It's just making it easier to consume and to move forward, to have those conventions and those abstractions so you can do more things faster, better. Pairing with the Spring team. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, so if you are in the repo, in my repo that I shared, I have that same exact example under the output package. And again, there are a few different examples in here. I'm not going to run these, but you could say like, hey, give me the content back. But you'll notice that, hey, you just get a list of like all these films back. But if you're very specific and say, I want that entity back, you can get, it'll basically have the filmography for that actor and then a list of strings, which is all the movies that that particular actor has been in. Then you can even return a list of things. So you can use that thing that we've seen around Spring before, right? The parameterized type reference. If you need to get a list of things, we use that with the REST client. I use it in GraphQL. I use it here with AI, saying, hey, the entity that I want back is basically a list of those actor films. And then, yeah, you can even use the Lambda inside of that user call to replace a token. In this case, I want to pass in the actor to the argument, and and then just get an entity of those back. So that the facility to be able to just pass in any arbitrary type and get that back from the response is amazing. And again, conversations that I've had with Mark and Christian was not easy to do. With, again, maybe with one LLM that might have been okay, that might have been easy, but being able to get this to work across all the different LLMs that we support, bravo team.
Absolutely, bravo. And there's an interesting question here from Andres. It says, morning, I got a question for you two. Using Spring AI, the version that's already released, not the new one, is it possible to make a production app like a chatbot for a company, for any company with its own features? The answer is yes. There are customers. We have stories from the ecosystem where people, customers, teams, orgs just like yours, were using Spring AI to deliver a chatbot like feature for their company, for their products, for their order tracking, for their documentation. That was, I think, the most popular one. Is like, hey, tell me about this product. On this product, can I do this thing? And they were using one of the many models that was available, and they were just like Simon said. They were using the retrieval augmented generation to pull in their documentation, their product documentation, to augment that response. So you get a chat bot like response, a chat bot like experience using that company's specific data or specific documentation. Absolutely, yes.
You could use it before 1.0, but I would say use 1.0 if you can. One,
you'll be happier.
All the new features we're talking about today. Two, one of the things that is in that blog post is this thing called advisors. And you could say here on line 18, I'm saying here are the default advisors. One of those types of advisors is a question and answer advisor. So this is using RAG. It's using the underlying vector store to kind of answer these questions and pass these along in context. But yeah, this is a very common use case and really easy, in my opinion, in Spring AI to get started with.
One of the examples that Josh, I think, showed it in his keynote, but I also, he's also done it on one of his live streams. Just this idea of, I've got data in a database somewhere, in a Postgres database somewhere, and I would like to provide a chat interface to that data. How do I do it? And the steps are not that difficult. Either watch the Spring IO keynote. There's a link to it. It's actually on our YouTube channel. Watch that, and there is a very simple abstraction. There's a simple way to do this, to add a vector search, which that AI model can then use to kind of give an overview, right? Feed the chatbot, feed that model with information about your specific data that already exists in your database. So you don't have to build a whole lot of new features. There is an easy path to go for some use cases to go from the data that already exists in your database to having that same data vectorized into a vector database. If you're going from Postgres, there's vector PG vector.
PG vector.
That's just adding some columns to that same database table to give it that searchable context. And yes, and you're off to the races. That is a really cool use case.
Because the main thing is like, everything when it comes to these LLMs, we talk about the currency of LLMs being tokens, right? How many tokens am I sending along to the LLM as part of my query? How many tokens am I getting back as part of my answer? So as part of your question, you don't want to say, what is the, give me a summary for product XYZ. We don't want to send 3,000 pages of documents along to the LM to search through to answer that simple query, because that's 3,000. It's not 3,000, but it's X amount of tokens that we're sending. Instead, what we want to do is query that vector database and say, can you find some similar searches or similar tokens in that database? And if so, send those along in the query. And so, yeah, again, as DaShaun said, pretty easy to get up and running with all your existing data, with your PDFs. There's ways to take PDF documents and embed those into a vector database using Spring AI. You're not alone. This is a very common use case with what everyone's trying to use AI for right now. Okay, so on that builder, I said there were a bunch of default methods that you can use. One is like a default system. So the user message is the kind of query that I'm sending to the LLM. Hey, GPT, tell me a joke about dogs, right? The system message is at an overarching hierarchy, how should this assistant act? And so a good example of this is like, you're a friendly chatbot, but you're going to answer everything in a pirate voice. So even though it's a funny joke about dogs, it would respond back in a pirate voice because that's kind of the overall hierarchy of the assistant. That's how it's going to act. So you can set some default system messages at the top when you kind of build out that chat client. And then every other method that uses that chat client can call using that user message and still use that kind of overarching hierarchy.
Fun fact, there are multiple models that if you ask, can you respond in the style of our good friend Josh Long? In fact, it will respond by saying, hello, spring friends. In the chat response, not every model, but some of the models know Josh Long and know his style enough where the response will come back in the style of Josh Long. I find that amazing.
That is awesome. Okay. Another common pattern when calling an AI model with user text is to append or augment the prompt with contextual data. This is what we were just talking about. This is similar to AOP, where method arguments can be modified before and after invocation. The advisor in Spring AI allows you to specify this behavior around an AI model call. So advisors are new. The contextual data can be two different types basically right now. Your own data, so I want to augment the AI. This could be just a string that I'm sending. This could be data that is coming from a vector database, also known in this case as RAG. These are ways that we are augmenting the conversation. The other approach to this is conversational history, and this is new and exciting. So we forget that the web is very stateless, right? It doesn't remember, there is no memory there. But we forget about this, DaShaun, when we use something like ChatGPT, because we ask it a question, we follow it up. We don't have to tell it again what we just asked it. It remembers that conversation. But it's important to understand that that's not GPT remembering that. That is the product, ChatGPT, that is storing that somewhere and sending that along every time to the GPT model so that it understands, has a historical conversation. So previously in Spring AI, you couldn't do this, but now there is an advisor for conversational history. And I think I have an example here. And so the biggest example that I always use is I go in and I make a call to the LM and I say, hey, my name's Dan. Goes, hey, Dan, I'm an AI. I don't really have any feelings, but I can help you with whatever you want, right? And then the next call is, hey, do you remember my name? And now it can go, oh, yeah, I do. Your name's Dan. What can I help you with? And so the way that you do that is using this default advisors. I'm going to say, hey, I need a new message chat memory advisor, and I want you to use the in-memory chat memory. So this is kind of the first implementation of this. This is just in memory. Again, you have to remember certain LLMs have a max input that you can send them. So you got to be careful with that. And if this is in production, this is going to cost money. This is the first implementation of this. This is an in-memory chat memory. Now I can imagine if you start scaling this out, DaShaun, you know where I'm going with this. If you had multiple instances of this distributed across your organization, then you would probably want to reach for something like Redis, right? And you would have to kind of build that out using this. But the framework is there now, where the framework wasn't there before. So if you want to just get started and build a simple example with in-memory chat memory, works out of the box. I imagine down the line, we'll see some other implementations of this.
Fantastic. That's good. I got a question for you, Dan, as we're running out of time here. If you're interested in Spring AI, you're interested in this whole AI, you've heard about it, the news, or your boss says, we need some AI. What's a good project? How should I get started on this?
I think like we always kind of point people to is the documentation. Start with the docs, and then look at some of these GitHub repos that we mentioned. So the Spring projects, there's some samples in the actual Spring AI project. So look at those. Look at Craig Walls's, Hubuma's. Look at mine that I just kind of showed off today. There's a bunch of examples in there. And I think what that will start to get you to understand is like how mechanically things work. How do I do these things? Then it hopefully opens up the kind of like, what can I do with this type of thinking, right? What are some things inside my organization? What are some things for this SaaS app that I want to build? What are some things that I can use this for? And so I think that gets the creative juices going. So I'm always a documentation, GitHub repo. I'll shamelessly plug my YouTube channel as well, but I think those are some good places to start.
As you should. Wonderful. This was good. I hope that this was valuable. I hope that this kind of opens the door. Let's everyone. Spring AI is here. It's very, very popular. People love it. The feedback has been amazing. It is a hot project. It's moving fast. Tons of contributions from all over the ecosystem, and it's worth taking for a spin. I think it's got legs. I think it's gonna be around for a little while.
It's not going anywhere, that's for sure. Yeah, and I just want to say shout out to Mark Pollock, the team lead on this project. Christian I don't know how to pronounce Christian's last name. Zola. All right. Thank you for that. Christian has been really helpful. Every time I Slack them, Christian's on top of this, answers questions. I thought they both did a great job at Spring.io and presenting a lot of this material. So
they did.
I'm excited about the future of the project.
We're lucky to have them.
Yes.
They've done amazing. Sometimes I think maybe we don't deserve them. But I think I'm grateful for the work that they have done either way. And we should all be grateful for all the work that they have done because it's a great, cool project. It gives us, we can have an answer. We have some, because of Spring AI, we have a voice. We can actually speak to what's possible with AI, and we can talk about the use cases that are working and the ones that aren't, because we're seeing it, we're hearing it in real time, and we're talking about it here on the show. We're sharing it with you, the audience, and we thank you for being here.
Cool. So if you have questions about Spring AI, please feel free to reach out to us outside of the show, or come back to the next episode and ask your questions here. But yeah, we appreciate you spending some time with us, everyone who came to the live stream. Again, if you're joining us on the podcast, wherever you get your podcast, do us a big favor, leave us a review, say some nice things about us so we can keep
or tell us what to fix. I mean, we're here to learn as well.
Yeah. I heard a good quote yesterday. Funny enough, watching the NBA Finals, JJ Redick said, "Every day is a great day because every day is an opportunity to learn something new." Absolutely. And I agree with that. So yeah, I hope you guys learned something new. We had some fun with that, and we will be back next week. We got to get the next couple of weeks set up. DaShaun and I are, DaShaun's not on the road for 2 weeks. I'm on the road for 2 weeks, one of which is in Toronto with you. Mm-hmm. And then in 2 weeks, I'm coming to your city to both talk about Java and eat some barbecue. I don't know which one I'm more excited about. Probably the barbecue, though.
Yep. I'm going to be at the St. Louis Java user group later this week. Awesome. I'm looking forward to that. And then, yes, Toronto, and I will also be at KCDC.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Cool. Well, we'll get some more episodes put up there. So for everything Spring Office Hours, check out springofficehours.io. And with that, we will see you in the next episode. Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. Take care. We'll see you next time.